Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. Let me just get a bit of volume there. There we go. It is 10:07 p.m. on Friday, October 17th. And time is moving quickly. I think this is just a thing that happens when you get older. Those of you who are over 50, you know what I'm talking about. Like time just, there comes to be a preciousness about time as you get older. You know, I'm not that old. I mean, I'm 59 years old. But you definitely this decade has really made me think about time in a different way. My 50s have been a really productive decade. I got those 4 books written. I built a life. I built a house. My son built a house. I'm building another house now. It's been a really eventful decade, and as I go through it, I notice a lot of things. They sort of become manifest for me. Very kind of accidentally. They just kind of drop into my consciousness, and I go, it's, like some invisible being is whispering in my ear or something. And I get these little hints, these little nudges, like, you're doing so well now because you're not doing it for yourself. And I thought, where did that come from? And then I thought about it intermittently. I don't want you to think I broke out a ruler and a protractor and some pen, some paper and a pencil. I mean, I don't mean thinking that way. I mean, I contemplate it, but it's true. It's really true. And I'm much more consistent at this stage of my life in terms of my ability to bring things into existence, I'd say. Most people are winding down around 59 or 60. I feel like I'm just getting started. I'm doing it for my wife, I'm doing it for my family, I'm doing it for my son. All of these things. And I notice that everything is easier when you're doing it for someone else. I can't believe it took me almost 60 years to figure this out. I mean, I've read it 100 times. It's in my foundational spiritual training. It's in the Bible. Love your brother as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. But to go from words to actually realizing it, I mean, that's the whole journey, isn't it? Anybody can read a sentence and go, yeah, I understand that. I should love my neighbor as I love myself. But I feel really rooted in the desire to create an opportunity for other people to succeed and an opportunity to create a better Pueblo. And everyone's supporting me. So it's a wonderful feeling to be, a leader, I guess, in a small scale. I wonder if other people think this way. I wonder if, like, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Sam Altman and all these tech billionaires, I wonder if they're thinking I'm doing this for humanity. I'm creating this technology for humanity. You know? I would like to believe that's the case. Anyways, I have a bit of a show prepared tonight. I want to do a show on the Bank of International Settlements and specifically the Project Mandela. You can go to you can just Google this after the podcast and go and do some of your own research, but it's really quite something, you know. So the first thing I want to do is take a look at some material I've prepared.
In Basel, the Bank of International Settlements wields secretive financial power globally.
Things you need to know about the Bank of International Settlements.
I'm not sure my brain's big enough for this, but keep going.
It is.
Okay.
It has sovereign immunity.
What does that mean?
It's above the law.
It's its own country.
Right. It's its own country. It has its own police force. And essentially, other than one of its staff being in a car accident or, minor things, no one has the legal authority to move against it. Okay. It has sovereign immunity. That's number one. Number two, it can move money and hold it on its on its balance sheet and manage money secretly. So if I want to, I'm grossly oversimplifying, if I want to steal $21 trillion from the U.S. government and park it on the balance sheet of the BIS, it can move it anywhere in the world and it can keep it on its balance sheet secretly.
Now that's a couple of amazing things to consider. Now you may have recognized the heroic lady with Tucker Carlson there. She is Catherine Austin Fitts. And I think she's remarkable. So much of the truth that we've been given through the available human media, and make no mistake about it, what we're going through now will be considered in the future a fair and valid process of disclosure and discussion. Okay? Because something is being decided. Something has been decided. Another thing it's important to understand is that by the time people start talking about the possibility of something, like a significant enough buzz, rumor, gossip, innuendo, internet fear-mongering, conspiracy theory, if you will, they're all forms of disclosure. And the reason you're responsible for interpreting it is because our Creator gave us discernment. Our Creator gave us a conscience. Our Creator gave us a heart. So when you see people like Catherine Austin Fitts out doing her thing, and her thing as of late has been largely focused on the Bank of International Settlements and the 20 to 30 trillion, I think it's 21 trillion that has verifiably, like it's not in dispute, verifiably disappeared from the U.S. Treasury. The first 2 or 3 trillion was announced the day before 2 planes allegedly hit the Twin Towers in New York. Building 7 allegedly was compromised due to the trauma of its neighboring buildings and collapsed in what looked like exactly a controlled demolition. later to be basically admitted to by the Jewish billionaire who had 3 weeks before taken out a double insurance policy. It took him quite a while to collect. The insurance company didn't want to pay him because they, I suspect, this is the Talamanca Review. I'm not being deposed for a court proceeding. I'm just a guy in an earthbag bodega talking on the internet. But I suspect that the insurance companies believed he had foreknowledge, which would have canceled his insurance policy. Right? You can't take an insurance policy out on your wife knowing a hitman's going to kill her and collect. You have, I think they actually ended the Seinfeld season with this, the Good Samaritan law. It's basically a law that if you're not allowed to profit from a crime. I couldn't quote you the exact section of law or statute, but it's a generally adhered to principle in most Western societies. So they didn't want to pay the guy. And he didn't get paid until that dude got into power in New York. And this goes back about 20 years. Does everybody remember a guy named Elliot Spitzer? He got his career destroyed because he got caught with a prostitute, which is like going to Disneyland compared to what the rest of these leches do in Washington and power centers. Hiring a prostitute, a high-end New York escort for $1,500. If I found that out about a sitting politician, I'd say keep him in power. That's a very sure, it shows weak character for sure, but it's a lot more transparent than, going to Epstein Island or something like that. But it was Donald Rumsfeld who told us that we're missing, I forget what it was, 2.1 or 2.8 or 3.1 trillion from the DOD, and he couldn't account for it. Now, I want you to stop and think about that for a moment. And that's just the first 15%, right? And not even 15, it's about 12.5 or 13% of if it's 21 trillion, of the 21 trillion that we're now missing. Almost an infinitesimal amount of money, the 3 trillion. But that's what began it all. Now, in the United States, there's a revenue agency with I don't know how many people, but this is worth looking up. I'm going to look this up, okay? Because it's worth it. How many people does the IRS employ? Uh, According to the data for fiscal year 2024, the IRS used 90,516 full-time equivalent positions in conducting its work. Another source indicates that as of September 2024, the IRS employed approximately 99,001 civilian federal employees. Okay? And when they do things like, I don't know exactly how they operate, but I imagine it's very similar to the way they operate in Canada as well. So let's say like you're a house contractor, and you're doing one out of every three jobs under the table. And it might be a relatively small job. It might be a finished basement with insulation and paneling and a gypsum ceiling, a drywall ceiling, and you do a little sponge design in the ceiling, put some lights in, put some foam down, some carpet, and you finish a basement. So wood paneling was when I was growing up, but nowadays I think in a lot of basements they just throw up drywall. A competent construction guy who's got his tools and knows his trade could do an 800 to 1200 square foot basement in probably 3 or 4 days, and with one assistant, and probably charge about $5,000 for that. Now in Canada, what they did to find construction workers working under the table is they went to the hardware stores and they looked at purchases. What's the word I'm looking for? They requested or demanded access to, like, the home hardware database. We have home hardware in Canada as well. And they would look at the purchasing material made by one account. And maybe it was paid for by credit card. It would be more difficult to track if it was paid for by cash. But I mean, if you're buying, $3,000 or $4,000 worth of material, electrical wires, drywall, pine 2x4s to do the framing, light fixtures, all the things that go into a basement. I mean, how many people do you know who go into a hardware store and pull out a stack like that, like Tony Soprano, and pay cash? Not very many. So then they correlated the material purchases to the income tax returns of the contractors. And then they would request an interview if they felt there was a discrepancy. And the person would go in for the interview and they would be interrogated. And then it's a very threatening thing when you're dealing with revenue agencies. They have the power to incarcerate you. Nobody should go to jail for stuff like that. You should maybe, I don't know, lose a benefit or something. But when you have socialized medicine, paying your taxes is a very serious thing because the hospitals take care of everybody. So then if the person, broke down and said, yeah, I did this, this, and this under the table. I did this in 2023. It was, I was paid $30,000, and then the revenue agency would say, okay, well, the taxes on that 2 years ago would have been about 37%. We're also fining you $10,000, and you have to pay interest on the principal and the fine for the 2, 3, or 4 years it took us to find you and arrive at this conclusion that you've been avoiding paying your taxes. And so you're handed this huge bill. What originally might have been $15,000 is now $25,000 plus 4 years of interest. So you're up around $40,000. Okay, now what am I talking about? This is how precisely they can find a tradesman working under the table in Canada. I know this because the newspapers in Canada talked about this. Okay? It was almost like a warning to the contractors. Hey, everybody get ready. Canada Revenue Agency wants to look at the purchasing orders at Home Hardware. So if you've been working under the table, boom. And they can do all of that. And yet we sit and tolerate a public official who, at the time, Secretary of Defense, and this would have been Donald Rumsfeld, telling the public they've misplaced $3 trillion. Now, that would not be a physical asset. You know, it's not sitting in like steel boxes or something in a warehouse that's guarded by the military. You know how much volume $3 trillion would be? That's a lot of money. Which returns us to the principle of computing and accounting. How is it even possible that the Department of Defense misplaced $3 trillion? You call up a computer screen, there's the budget, there's the money that Congress sent, blah, 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 blah. There has to be a point at which the money leaves the system. And that's just $3 trillion. Not the 21 trillion that Catherine Austin Fitts is talking about. And I absolutely assure you, Miss Austin Fitts is not prone to hyperbole. If anything, she's understating it. And probably, if you were to have a coffee with her, she'd probably say, I don't say this on air, but I believe it's closer to 45 trillion. But the other 25 trillion I can't prove as definitively as I can prove the 21 trillion. Okay? So I'm sort of setting the stage here. Okay? Again, it's this and governments wonder why they have restless populations. It's like they're morons, or they've gone into such a state of self-entitlement that they can't even believe that the serfs, the peons, are putting up a fuss. You know? The level of arrogance in Washington now probably exceeds the level of arrogance in the British parliamentary and aristocratic system that propelled people to get on wooden boats, in which 1 out of every 3 people did not survive the voyage, to come to the New World. And so 400 years ago, they made this death-defying trip on a wooden sailboat to the New World, to America, to become settlers. Imagine the courage that took. Imagine the oppression they were fleeing. Okay? Imagine. And now, 350, 400 years later, I mean, if you want to go by the Constitution, it's only 250 years later, 1776. It'll be 250 next year, I guess. 250 years later, they have now a more entitled Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake, go fuck yourself entitlement system in Washington than the one they left 300 years ago. I'm just getting warmed up. This is just the preamble to what this podcast is about. Let's take another look at a Bank of International Settlement video.
When I was at the BIS, it did strike me and my colleagues at the BIS that maybe against the short-run benefits following these kinds of policies, that one ought to take into account more carefully the fact that these policies might have more negative implications over time, and not least of which, of course, is the buildup of debt. You sense that you've got a shortfall in aggregate demand, and so you want to lower interest rates. And all that does is it basically induces people to take spending that they might have done in the future and bring it forward to today. But if you're going to do that, for anybody who's sort of income constrained, then the only way you can do that is by taking out debts to allow you to get the money to be able to spend today. But then you say the policy works through increasing debt. But of course, next period, people that have got even higher debts going forward are less likely to spend more money.
Fascinating. So, and there I lost my volume again. Isn't that interesting? Hello, 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 hello. Yeah, that seems to be a bit better. And then the debt crisis or the debt situation is a complete and total load of bullshit. Okay? I mean, if you factor in the money that Catherine Austin Fitts says went missing. Hold on a sec, I gotta fix my volume properly here. That's amazing how I lose volume. It's like a defect in the system here. Okay, there we are. Yeah, that should be better. So allegedly, the United States is $37 trillion in debt. And according to Catherine Austin Fitts, 21 trillion disappeared. Which means that the US is really only about 16 trillion in debt, which is only about a 1-to-1 equivalency for its annual gross domestic product, which is a remarkably high debt level, but not unmanageable. I mean, think of a house mortgage. You make $100,000 a year. You buy a $500,000 house. It's 5 times your annual gross domestic product as an individual pre-tax. And yet you can still pay for the house over 20-25 years. So it's not an unmanageable level of debt. What I'm getting at is this. We have evolved into a society where the average people are castigated for the peccadillos of the elite. It's the elite that are driving up this debt. Yes, individual credit card is unusually high in America, but because people don't have any other option other than to use their credit cards to pay for things that they need. But that's only because the economy's not working. I talked a little bit about this last night. I talked about the labor movement. You know, Jimmy Hoffa, you all remember Jimmy Hoffa. But just how unbelievably we're being screwed, Canadians and Americans. And they kind of play favorites in a way. You know, there's a cat they kick and there's a cat they stroke. There's a cat they feed garbage and there's a cat they feed tuna. The world's always run this way. You're never going to find a period in history where 100% of the global population says this planet is a living hell. When we went through our heyday in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s were pretty rich. When we went through that 5 decades of prosperity and ease, meaning that everybody could have a nice home, everybody could have a car, everybody could retire. When we went through all of that, there was nowhere near the level of productivity we have now. Nowhere near. I mean, we had the same heavy equipment, we were using cranes, there haven't been any real innovations in steel. A steel girder is a steel girder when you're building a skyscraper. It's pretty much the same product it was 100 years ago in 1925. The cranes, the combustion engine, this is all old technology. The only thing that has really significantly advanced is computational technology. And that has gone through the roof. Now, I want you to consider this. All of the computational technology, like they're now saying about the artificial intelligence, was supposed to make our lives better, increased productivity. Did it increase productivity? If it increased productivity, which means you're literally producing more, then why has the aggregate standard of living fallen so much? Whether it be access to housing that you own. Now, this has been a uniquely North American phenomenon. Most Parisians, unless you're born into a family that has a farm that it's had for 5 generations and you make cheese or something and you sell it in Paris, you have a home. But the average Londoner, the average Parisian, they're going to rent their whole life. Their calculation for retirement is completely different than a North American, at least the way the baby boomers did it. Baby boomers work for 25 years, retire, maybe 35 years if they really like what they're doing and they're making a lot of money. And then when they retire, they have a pension, and then they have this massive nest egg in the form of the family home, which they'll hold on to until it becomes too cumbersome to maintain. And then they'll sell in their mid-70s, late 70s, and move into an apartment. And then from the apartment, when their health really starts to fail, they'll move into a senior's residence. And all of that has really sort of facilitated the luxury of a comfortable retirement in North America has always been facilitated by home ownership. And you sell the home when you no longer need it. Or you pass it down to your children, and your children take care of you. Which is how they do it over here. So, with that model gone now, the question is, how do you get anything done? How do you retire on an abysmal public pension like Social Security or the Canada Pension Plan that won't allow you to survive for 10 days in an urban center? You won't be able to pay rent. You won't be able to buy. It's just not enough money. They've been de-indexing the pensions for decades now, meaning that it's beyond even that. Like, nothing in the money system makes any sense anymore. They eradicated the fractional. You don't even need a reserve at a central bank anymore, which begs the question more clearly than any other decade since the formation of the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada. What is debt? And who do we owe it to? Okay? There's not even a reserve standard in the banking system anymore. We've literally been printing money since about, I don't know, I would say 2008, since the bail-in. And then it got even worse after COVID. They completely abandoned the reserve. A national emergency, we have to print money to allow people to eat and live because we're shutting down their lives for 3 years due to a pandemic. Right? There's all these people out there going around saying, oh, we need to fight these people. We need to fight the World Economic Forum. And there's nothing left to fight. They've already done it. We already own nothing. Okay? Now I'm going to introduce you to what is perhaps, the most disturbing thing. Now, this is not a critical third-party video on the Bank of International Settlements. And before I forget, remember the one other thing that Catherine Austin Fitts said. The Bank of International Settlements, which was set up after World War I, curious timing there, money is the ultimate weapon. If you want to understand where we're going, keep your attention on money and the regulatory framework of money. So the eradication of a reserve system was the first step in owning nothing, because the paper you're using to buy your Wonder Bread and your bologna is worthless. It continues to circulate simply because nobody in the society has stopped believing in it. The only thing that might happen when you print too much money is suddenly you notice that imports are more expensive. You know, costs more for an imported television or an imported car because the foreign seller wants to make the same money on the vehicle that they made in real wealth. Okay? Because remember, they want to make the same money they used to make on the car as you're devaluing your own currency. Okay? It's just mind-boggling. So you could never question, criticize, charge, sue, or incriminate in any way the Bank of International Settlements. Now, one of the things that I did, which I personally felt was very clever, was I presented the idea that the concept of a negative force, like a satanic force, would not come at us through night terrors and attempts to seize our soul in our unconscious or in our awakened imagination. We have literal spiritual battles, as Christianity seems to be focusing on now. If you watch all these Christian podcasters now, it's exorcism. We're battling the devil. No, you're not, you fucking idiots. The devil went into institutions. Okay? So sovereign immunity is something the world has never seen. Okay, so this is global sovereign immunity. Now you could have domestic national sovereign immunity. The Emperor of China had sovereign immunity. The Emperor of Japan had sovereign immunity. But only in Japan. Okay? The Allied forces could have prosecuted the Emperor of China and his family after World War II. I'm not sure they did. I don't feel like looking it up. When the Emperor of China's sovereign immunity evaporated, he finished his life in some discomfort. Brilliant Bernardo Bertolucci film called The Last Emperor, I believe made in the mid-late 80s. 4-hour movie. It's right up there with Gandhi and Lawrence of Arabia, if you like a good, long, epic historical movie. It's phenomenally well done. And tells the story of the last emperor of China. And the Bank of International Settlements is as a corporate institutional entity. And remember, entities have the same status in law, a person, as an organic, living, souled human being. Okay? So when the Bank of International Settlements steps into a court, the bench receives it just like it would receive you or me. It's a person. This is why on some podcast, I did a little bit of this in the Land and Man series I did. I think it was a 3-part series where I talked about Admiralty law, but they're locking it in now. Okay? And I don't think there's anything you can do to stop it now. And I don't often quote the Bible because I don't think the Bible is a really good source of information if you want to understand God. I think the Bible's a good source of information if you want to understand the relationship between the astral and the physical. Okay? It's also a relatively new document. I mean, the Torah is not older than 3,500 years. And human beings have been on this planet, well, according to the Galactic Historian book I wrote, at least 55 million years. There's been sentient life and civilizations on this planet. So don't tell me the Bible, which is, the Christian Bible, which is 2,000 years old from the Vatican or the Catholics, and don't tell me it's the Word of God. I feel like punching fucking people in the face when they say things that fucking stupid. But the Bible is an excellent astrological document for understanding the epoch we're living in. And the prophetically seen astral events which are sitting ready to discharge into the timeline. And here I'm referring to the book of Revelation. Now, I say that's a plan, and I'm not redacting that. But again, it goes to this idea of disclosure. You think the powers that be that are upset that Catherine Austin Fitts is doing these podcasts? You know why I don't get hassled for stuff like The Light of Darkness and The Devil in Us? Because it's disclosure. Okay? I'm actually, in a sense, aiding their cause. Because I tried to tell the public what's going on, and nobody fucking listened. But it gives them the right to say, hey man, you know what? People were told. They didn't give a shit. They thought this Bruce McDonald guy was fucking crazy. They thought this Catherine Austin Fitts was fucking nuts. Tucker Carlson's crazy now, don't you know? And an anti-Semite. And Candace Owens, too. They can just go at your reputation like that. And 9 out of 10 of the fucking idiot drones that watch TV will believe it. Because they don't have the internal understanding and fortitude and self-awareness to stand up to this nonsense. So don't tell me we're going to mount some fucking great defense against all of this shit. We're not. We've already lost. Now this next one's a bit longer, okay? And this is from the Bank of International Settlements itself. Okay? It's 9 minutes. Listen carefully to what they're saying, and then afterwards, I'm going to shred it. I've already got my notes prepared, but you need to see this before I can do what I need to do.
Welcome to the Technical Explainer video for Project Mandala. In this video, we will take a deep dive into the back end of the Mandala proof of concept. We'll explore the components of the systems, their workings, and how the participants interact with the system with the help of a real-world use case in this video. All participant institutions, commercial banks, central banks, or any other regulated financial institutions run a Mandala node in their system. These participants interact directly with each other via a peer-to-peer messaging system, eliminating the need for intermediaries. Communication between nodes is encrypted, ensuring data security and confidentiality. This facilitates participants in obtaining relevant policies that apply to a transaction, transmitting encrypted data necessary for generating a proof of compliance, sharing the generated proofs, and handling any other communication essential for automated compliance checks. The next critical component of Project Mandala is the rules engine. Mandala systems hold policies in a comprehensive policy library, which standardizes the representation of policy and regulatory measures across different jurisdictions. The system also provides templates, offering a structured format for ingesting new policies and regulations that are then converted into machine-readable data. This standardization allows a vast number of differing measures from various jurisdictions to be encoded as rules within the system. These rules are stored in the rules repository. From that repository, the pertinent rules can be retrieved and automatically displayed as a dynamic compliance checklist based on the bank's transaction inputs, and ultimately applied against the consumer data for the relevant compliance checks. Based on the transaction details of an incoming payment request, the rules engine retrieves the relevant policies that apply to this specific transaction. The core component of Mandala, the proof engine, then performs the checks. For each relevant rule, the proof engine conducts the necessary checks using client data, transaction details, or, if necessary, communicates with other Mandala nodes like the beneficiary bank. And where communication with other nodes is required, Mandala provides ways to complete these checks in a private manner using techniques like zero-knowledge proofs and multi-party computation. Compliance proofs are then integrated into the asset transfer system, providing evidence that all necessary compliance checks have been completed. This ensures seamless and faster value transfers.
Let's see how the Mandala system works with a real-world example. A Korean battery company, K, sources its lithium from Australian company A. To boost production, company A needs additional investment. Company K agrees to finance this by purchasing A's convertible bonds. The payment for these bonds includes two parts. A portion is offset or netted against payables between companies. The rest is paid through a cross-border interbank transfer. Now, let's focus on the cross-border interbank transfer for this purpose.
In this case, the originating bank is the Korean bank, and the beneficiary bank is the Australian bank. An officer at the Korean commercial bank initiates a compliance check for a transaction using the Mandala interface. Based on the purpose of the transfer, acquisition of securities, the payment type, netting, and the currency, US dollar. The rules engine retrieves the applicable policies. The originating bank can also communicate with the beneficiary bank directly to obtain the relevant policies if not available. The system checks the client and beneficiary details against public sanctions lists and, upon successful completion, generates a zero-knowledge proof. This proof is tamper-proof and allows any party in the payment chain to verify that the check was completed without revealing the client data used in the check. For the beneficiary's private sanctions list, the client's data and the beneficiary bank's private sanctions list are compared using secure multi-party computation to ensure privacy. The results are digitally signed by both parties and mapped in their databases against the compliance check ID. These examples show how Mandala can perform checks while preserving privacy between the transacting parties. The compliance check ID is embedded into the SWIFT message, such as a PAX 008, which is used for the credit transfer transactions between customers. Every institution in the payment chain can read the compliance check ID from the SWIFT message and access their Mandala system to retrieve the proofs. This allows them to verify that the required compliance checks have already been completed, enabling them to forward the message without performing additional checks at the time of payment. This process is repeated for each institution in the payment chain until it reaches the beneficiary bank. This approach aims to reduce payment processing time and minimizes the risk of payment failure while ensuring compliance across jurisdictions.
The proof of compliance can also be used in a tokenized payment system. To showcase this, let's assume another real-world example. A Malaysian company borrows from a Singaporean entity. The rules engine retrieves the applicable policies. The public and private sanction list checks are conducted the same way as described before. Additionally, Malaysian capital flow management measures apply for this scenario. Through a multi-party compute approach, compliance with the CFM measures can be checked with Bank Negara Malaysia without revealing any of the underlying data. A signature of the central bank is then added to the proof set. Let's explore how proofs are incorporated and verified within a digital asset settlement system using tokenized Singapore dollars.
The process starts with the originating bank in Singapore, which wraps the SGD with a smart contract policy wrapper. This wrapper breaks down each proof in the proof set and sends them to the appropriate verifier contracts. These verifier contracts are deployed on the same chain as the policy wrapper, with each policy having its own dedicated verifier contract. The verifier contracts check that hash of the public sanction list matches the latest version. The content.
I don't think I'm going to finish, but there's only a minute and a half left. But I mean, you get the general idea, right? It's basically how the computer running the economy globally And it raises a lot of questions. A lot of questions. Now, the Bank of International Settlements has habitually been an arm of the Anglo-American Empire and the Masonic Zionist elite of the West. Now, ancillary countries have been trying to break into this monetary system for quite some time now. We've heard uncounted and untold numbers of conspiracy theories about BRICS and how BRICS is going to impact the economy, but why is so much time and attention being put into the Bank of International Settlements, and it's tokenized? Now, so this is, by the way, if you didn't pick it up, this is all being set up for digital money. Okay? It's all digital money. So they're starting at the top level, which is the central bank of central banks, which is a sovereign entity possessing sovereign immunity. Now, I want you to really internalize what this means. It means the Bank of International Settlements can do whatever it wants and nobody can do anything about it. They could literally say, okay, well, we're going to take $3 trillion from Australia. Now, it might make the media, but you have no recourse. No recourse whatsoever. So, let's take a closer look at this. This phenomenon, okay? So now this is what they say, why they did it, okay? Now what I did, if you want to know, is I did a web scrape on the Bank of International Settlements' entire website. Took a half a day. I just downloaded it into a folder. And then I applied my AI engine to it with various questions and told my AI to write various reports. I'm loving the AI so far. It's boosting my productivity. But I'm a little bit afraid of it because every time productivity has been boosted since 1980, our real wealth goes down, begging the question, where is all this additional productivity going? You know, by the way, Catherine Austin Fitz's answer to that question is secret space programs and a breakaway civilization. Now that's worth thinking about and talking about for a moment before I get into the BIS stuff. We have no business being in space. We have no business being a spacefaring race. We're not ready. We're not mature enough. We're not evolved enough. We don't even understand what we are. We're extremely hostile and bipolar between passive and violent states, emotionally and physically. And we're going to go out into space. We've achieved no peace on this planet. There are wars going on all over the place right now. You know, Israel and Ukraine being two of the highlights. And yet we're going to go into space. Okay? Now, I hearken back to a number of conversations I had with my friend who I miss dearly, John Edmonds. And I remind you of what he said. You have no business going into space until you have mastered the lessons of your planet. And that means you can talk to plants, you can talk to animals, you have full mastery as a sentient being over your planet. And then when you've completely mastered the domain you live in, spiritually and interactively, and as a steward maintaining a harmonious balance that the Creator instigated through the natural systems that have grown amongst very different climates all over the world, if you can manage that and come to understand the totality of life you live with on your planet, then you go into space. And I suspect that John was told this by benign extraterrestrial races. And here we are, stealing loads of money from, it's probably not just America. The secret space program probably involves at least, 12 to 20 countries are probably involved in it. Okay? Now, there could be a reason for this. I mean, Why would you tell the human race we're going into space when you don't know? You see, they have to understand it first before they introduce it to us. Very much like the podcast I'm giving tonight about when they arrive at their conclusion. All right, their conclusion being you're going to own nothing and you will never have been happier. When they publicly start to say that, they're not talking about something that they're going to do. They're talking about something that they've already done. Now, when you look at all of the murders, the John Mack stuff that I've covered extensively on this podcast, the Men in Black, the tremendous suppression of any information about extraterrestrials since World War II, you could be disappeared in the blink of an eye. And now in 2025, all the levees have broken. And there's all these insiders now, like Richard Doty, former head of Air Force Intelligence, was one of the chief people in shutting down the UFO movement. Now, he's got a contract with Gaia now, talking about all the extraterrestrials. You have all of these like really weird young guys pop up with 1-2 million subscriber podcasts, like Danny Jones, the Concrete podcast, Julian Doherty's podcast, to name two. There's many. And they're all interviewing the same stable of people that are being pushed out by whatever entity is pushing them out, the Department of Defense or the CIA or whatever. We now have our narrative in place. Go out and tell the public. Okay? And they're doing with the extraterrestrial thing the same thing they did with the financial system. They do it, and then they tell us they're going to do it, and it's already done. Okay? And this is why 2025 is such a pivotal year for UFO disclosure. If you're into that, you know, the long form 3-hour interview with a guy who alleges he was appointed to interact with a captive extraterrestrial for 3 years at Area 51 or what have you. But it's all kind of a whitewash, okay? The same people that are bringing us this financial system, this completely... Anyways, I'll get into this now. So Project Mandela, basically, it's an initiative by the Bank of International Settlements to explore the feasibility of encoding jurisdiction-specific policy and regulatory requirements into a common protocol for cross-border use cases such as foreign direct investment, borrowing, and payments. Okay? Begging the question, what has hindered this to this point? Now, the problem is disparate policy and regulatory frameworks between different jurisdictions. Jurisdiction is a nation state. Okay? Between different jurisdictions are among the chief obstacles to smooth and efficient cross-border payments. They contribute to the regulatory compliance burden across the payment chain, increase the time for cross-border transactions, and introduce uncertainties among stakeholders. Yeah, bullshit. Solution is Project Mandela. It seeks to ease the policy and regulatory compliance burden by automating compliance procedures, providing real-time transaction monitoring, and increasing transparency and visibility around country-specific policies. It uses a compliance by design architecture that could enable a more efficient cross-border transfer of any digital assets, including CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and tokenized deposits. Not fiat paper. We're talking about crypto now, right? And it could also serve as the foundational compliance layer for legacy and nascent wholesale or retail payment systems. Okay. Now, the project is a proof of concept run by the BISIH, which is the Singapore Central Bank, the Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, the Bank of Korea, BOK, the Central Bank of Malaysia, BNM, and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS. with the collaboration of financial institutions. Okay. Now, based on the web scrape I did of the entire website, I asked the AI how Project Mandala could be perceived as restrictive. Okay, and how, and surprisingly, it gave me a very, very straightforward answer. I was a little surprised. It could be perceived as restrictive in several ways. Number one, automated compliance and blocking. The compliance by design architecture means regulatory rules are embedded directly into the payment system. This could lead to the automatic blocking of transactions that don't perfectly fit the predefined rules, potentially without a clear or immediate way to appeal. This restricts the freedom to transact if the system algorithmically flags an activity as non-compliant. 2. Increased surveillance. Well, thank God we don't want to lose another $21 trillion from the U.S. Treasury, do we? Increased surveillance. The system enables real-time transaction monitoring, and this creates a mechanism for constant financial surveillance by authorities, reducing privacy and the freedom to conduct financial affairs without being watched. 3. Now, as I say all of these things, I want you to keep in your mind what Justin Trudeau did during the COVID pandemic with the truckers and the supporters of the truckers. Okay? Potential for capital controls, number 3. The quantifiable and configurable rules for foreign exchange could give governments a powerful tool to instantly implement restrictive financial policies. They could limit how much money people can send across borders, effectively trapping capital within a country and restricting economic freedom. And 4, centralized control. By embedding national policies into a common protocol managed by central banks, the project centralizes control over cross-border payments. This concentration of power could be seen as a threat to the autonomy of individuals and businesses to manage their own finances. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place. We're caught between an attempted emerging financial collaboration called BRICS, which would, I think, seriously corrode the standard of living of the West, because the BRICS countries, and specifically China, with India as a close second, would probably be reaping a lot of the rewards that the United States did as the currency of reserve from Bretton Woods onwards. All right? So no country in the history of modern financial management has made more money on its money than the United States. And this was largely due to the deal struck with OPEC nations to only sell oil in US dollars, which is gone now, by the way. Saudi Arabia is not complying with that anymore, probably because of our unrelenting support of the terrorist nation known as Israel, the Zionist terrorist nation. So we have our Jewish friends to thank for that. Now, given that the Bank of International Settlements is doing all this, and it's undoubtedly under the control of the same forces that work with people like Larry Fink and BlackRock and Mark Carney, the Chief Executive Officer of Canada, with allegedly an arm's length distance from his holdings in Brookfield, which is the Canadian BlackRock, we're supposed to be safer in the hands of these people than the BRICS nations. There's no good outcome here. There's no good option. And I'll close with this. What an unusual name to give a transactional system. Project Mandala. When any marketing person would tell you that's probably not a good word to use, because the word mandala has been tattooed into the public mind as meaning aberrations with reality and time. But they chose to call this the Mandala Project. Mind-boggling. Anyways, I wanted to do a podcast on money tonight. I'll do more in the future, but remember what I've been saying, okay? And go back and read The Light of Darkness. This entire control system we live in now begins with the Bank of England, okay? Now, there's a whole group of people out there, a vast number of them, liberals. If you go and you get a classical liberal education, if you go to a liberal arts program, non-STEM program, science, technology, engineering, or math, you're going to be programmed to think that everything that happened from the Bank of England onward is what we call the Enlightenment that led to this wonderful world we're living in now, whereas before we used to die when we were 35 and shit in a hole in the ground. I would say that in some ways that could be true, that we're living a better life now than then, and there's been a lot of construction, a lot of explosion, a lot of raising of the standard of living in the world in the last 375 years. And, the Protestants and the Jews and other people use this as an evidentiary footnote to say that, the Vatican was holding back human growth and progress. That's one way of looking at it. And I'm not putting the Vatican up on a pedestal here. Another way of looking at it is it took them this long, 375 years, to create the perfect system that would lock us down into a kind of slavery we haven't fucking seen since the pharaohs built they didn't actually build the temples. A level of slavery heretofore unknown to humanity except for places like North Korea and similar places, Cuba, right? And even worse in some ways, in which the most basic elements of our life can be shut down by a policy. Somebody sitting at a computer and saying, okay, Jim Smith has no access to money, he can't pay any bills because he's violated this policy. Come on, buddy, you're right in front of the camera. Are you seriously going to do this? Yesterday it was an insect, today it's the cat. This cat likes to come in and sit on my desk all the time now. Unbelievable. Look at this guy. Cleaning himself there. Anyways, it's as good a time as any to call it a podcast. I'm going a bit longer these days. I said I was going to podcast less, but I'm actually doing about 70-minute podcasts consistently now. This is the Snake Killer, by the way. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review. I'm calling this podcast The Mandala Effect.